It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
It's the holidays, which usually means employing your surprise face. But winter-winning scratchers are loaded with $500 prizes, so there's always a surprise. Unlike the 27th snowflake ornament from Grandma. Play along with holiday scratchers from the Virginia Lottery at a retailer near you. For odds and more information, visit VALottery.com.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo Odor Jr. and I'm with my friend Barry. Bro, can you tell us something about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm 44 years old. I'm a software developer. I live in the United States, just outside of Minneapolis, with my wife and 3 kids. I've been a Christian for 4 years. The church I attend is in the Christian and Missionary Alliance denomination. And I enjoy talking with theists, atheists, people of all different sorts of views and worldviews online.
Awesome. Well, how you said that you started being a Christian 4 years ago. How did that come about? Like, when? Yeah,
sure. So I won't. It can be a very long story or a very short story, so I'll try to keep it brief. So for me, when I was in my teenage years, I got involved in drug use, drinking, and that kind of stuff. Somehow I still managed to get into college, but college was more of the same between studying and exams and things like that. It was a lot of partying and just sort of living life according to my own rules. And then that whole lifestyle sort of followed me into, I got married, had kids, but I still had a lot of what I now see was sin, just infecting my whole life, addiction, stuff like that. And about around the age of 35 or so, I sort of had what I think was the start of sort of a religious experience, which started out really badly. I woke up in the middle of the night one night having a panic attack out of nowhere, which was just terrifying. If anyone's had a panic attack, it's I wouldn't wish it on anyone. So I ended up leaving the house in the middle of the night for 2 hours, walking around the neighborhood, trying to figure out what's going on. Finally came back to my house, and for a few days after that, this kind of ongoing anxiety was continuing to follow me. That sort of changed over a few days into just depression, right? And during that time, I'm asking myself, like, what's my point in existing? Why am I getting up every day? So it's sort of this existential crisis, basically. Like, why am I here? What am I doing? What have I been doing with my life for the past, however many years? And that got me to really think hard about the big questions. That got me starting to think about my own mortality. Prior to that, it's like, I think until you get to a certain age in life, you think you're going to live forever. And once you start to realize you're not, those sort of questions start to come up. So the addictions and whatnot were still kind of following me. And I got to a point right around the age of 39, 40, where I just was sick of who I was, sick of how I was living, and one night just prayed. It was one of these kind of agnostic prayers, right? Like, I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you exist or if you're real, but if you are, please save me, because I'm so sick and tired of everything about my life, and I need out, and I can't quit, right? I tried to quit all the various addictions I had for, hundreds of times, thousands of times maybe. So anyway, after that prayer, I fell asleep. Next day, I even forgot about that it even happened, and over the next few days, I started to notice those desires were sort of less appealing. And then I noticed over a period of weeks and months that they really started to lose their hold on me. And it wasn't like I was even trying to quit anymore. It was just sort of like I had chains on my wrists, so to speak, and those chains were just sort of falling away. And I started just not wanting to continue pursuing the addictions that I had in my life. And at some point I remembered that prayer, right? It was kind of one of those things. Like, I kind of didn't know what was happening. Then I remembered that I had said this prayer, and I thought to myself, I wonder if I'm saved, which is a weird thing to think, right? To wonder, like, I don't know, maybe that prayer actually did something. And so, over a period of time, I came to believe that is exactly what happened. Prior to that, I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time looking into the truth claims of Christianity. Again, I was just sort of raised with that, so I guess it was nice that I had that to fall back on, right? That was the prayer that I prayed. And after that, I realized, like, it's nice that I think this. It's nice that I think that Jesus has saved me from my sins, but I need to ground this on something more than just my own personal experience, which I think is really valid. But I think you have to go beyond that if you want to have a strong and robust faith, and especially if you're going to interact with atheists and unbelievers online. So then I started really digging into apologetics. I discovered, I sort of was raised with this sense that, well, Christians are just sort of dumb, right? They just sort of believe this stuff, and they don't really have any good reasons. I grew up in Oklahoma, and the Christian culture that I came from was, somewhat anti-intellectual. It was sort of one of those things where you shouldn't ask too many questions and just have faith, that kind of stuff. So I started digging into apologetics, and of course I came across all the usual names that you're going to come across when you first start looking into this stuff. William Lane Craig and Frank Turek and guys like that, which was good. That's a good entry point for someone. But then I eventually moved into more philosophy and theology. At some point, I also discovered Justin Brierley's show. You might be familiar with, Unbelievable. And that sort of opened the door for me to realize, like, wow, there's a lot of really bright intellectual people who are also Christians. And that was important for me to know that, like, there's this whole world out there, and you can be a Christian and you can be intellectually justified in your beliefs, and you can defend them on a really strong intellectual foundation. At some point, I don't remember when, I picked up Ed Fazer's book. If you're familiar with him, he's a Catholic philosopher, former atheist. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a book called Aquinas, A Beginner's Guide. And I had heard of Aquinas prior to that, but I couldn't have told you anything about him. And I read this book, and he goes through the 5 ways of St. Thomas, and my mind was blown. And so since then, I've considered myself more or less a classical theist, and I've learned a lot more about St. Thomas and classical theism in general. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think that while there are certainly lots of questions about the truth of Christianity and puzzles and things to be wrestled with, I think that Christianity is true, and I think that it is intellectually robust and defensible, and so I consider it an act of worship to learn more to read the scriptures, to engage in apologetics, and to talk with people who don't believe. So
Well,
that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, I'd like to understand more how you've come to Christianity, though, right? Like, in your, I guess that 4 years ago, maybe you were 39 years old. I'm not sure, but what was the real reason? What do you think that? Like, I guess you said you were in an existential crisis. Like, what was in your mind as to say that you needed to come to Christ? Like, what was happening in your life? Why? Like, it's very spontaneous. You didn't expect it. You were in this down low. Would you say that it was pure emotion? What was it? You know.
I think in the moment it was just I had tried to quit and I won't go into all of the details, but like I said, drugs and other stuff, right? You can use your imagination, but I had things in my life that I just didn't want there, that I had tried to quit and tried to quit and tried to quit, and it was just one of these, like, I'm sick and tired of trying to quit and failing, and you sort of get to a point where you feel like, you know what, I might be just completely trapped and there's no way out. And that's a really, if you really get that feeling of being trapped in your own behavior, where you really feel like there's no escape from the lifestyle that you've sort of gotten yourself into, that's pretty scary. So yeah, I don't remember anything leading up to it. It's not like I had been considering Christianity very seriously, or it was fairly spontaneous. It was one night, like I said, and in fact, I think I might have been still under the influence. I very well might have been drinking that night, and I was later on coming down, or whatever you want to say, sobering up, when I just decided, you know what, I hate everything about the way that I'm living, and I need a way out. And so it was that prayer of, like, you know what, if you're real, I have no idea if you are, but if you can hear me, help. And
Well, what's
somehow,
interesting
some way,
about that,
I've been totally transformed in the last 4 years.
awesome.
I mean, yeah, I could go on and on, but I mean, even everything from my lifestyle down to just the things that you think about on a daily basis, the things that you give your time to, right?
Yeah, well,
So,
what's interesting about that, though, is that the rationality part, the intellectual defense came after you being a Christian. So in essence, being a Christian is not just being able to have the knowledge to defend your faith, but more so it's something that you, and in self-evident experience within you, that a Christian would say it's the working of the Holy Spirit. It's accepting Jesus Christ, being born again. And so, how would you describe that experience, though? That, would you say that was the start of you really being the Christian, and not how you being able to defend Christianity?
well, like I said, it started with just that sort of spontaneous, what I would describe as a non-intellectual response, right? A move of desperation in a way, and then the intellectual, the learning and the defense of it came later. But I do think there are a lot of people. I mean, when you get into apologetics, you come across people who it's all head and no heart, right? They're singularly focused on the arguments and the evidence and the relational aspect of loving and following Jesus and trying to model your life after him is sort of secondary. So yeah, I think the intellectual stuff's great, but if it hasn't connected with your heart and really changed the way that you see yourself and the way that you see other people, it's almost pointless, right?
Well,
Like,
but I wanna point this out, though, right? Like, you could defend your faith all you want, but you're not a Christian because of intellectual or rational reasons. That's for sure, right? Because you were already become a Christian, whether or not it was intellectually defensible. You did not know for certain yet at that point in your life when you decided to be a Christian. But let me ask you this though. How would you defend that experience from someone who would discount it as simply a down part of your life, purely chemicals in your brain that push you to that limit? How would you say that that experience was genuinely spiritual?
So you broke up there a little bit, but I think you were asking how I would defend my personal experience against a charge of that maybe it was just psychological or right. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that would be more of a plausible theory for me. And believe me, I've thought about this stuff a bunch because nobody wants to believe something and be mistaken, right? All of us, I think, value truth, and we want to base our beliefs on true things. So I think that if you we all have heard of the placebo effect, right? If you take a pill and you have a belief ahead of time that the pill is going to have some effect to change your health or whatever, studies have shown that a pill that's really nothing, a sugar pill, can have an effect, right? So I think that if that were the case for me, that I would be a little more concerned that it was just psychological fulfillment of a bunch of expectations. But at that time, I really didn't have any expectations, right? Number one, I didn't even know if any of it was true. Number one. Number two, the whole concept of sanctification, I hadn't even heard of it, right? I didn't understand any of that stuff. I had always thought that, and I think a lot of people think this, that before you can become a Christian, you need to fix yourself, and you need to become good, and you need to justify yourself in order to be to become a Christian. But so none of those things were in play for me. I really came to it with a pretty blank slate, not knowing what to expect. And as I mentioned, I even forgot that I had said the prayer and was surprised to find, like, wait a minute, the stuff that I really thought I could never stop doing is suddenly not that interesting to me anymore, and I don't know why. Oh, that's right. I remember that, days ago, weeks ago, whatever, I said this prayer. I wonder maybe that's what's going on here, right? Versus just thinking ahead of time, here's what's going to happen if I do this. So that's what I would say to that. I don't know if you had any other questions or objections.
Yeah, but
to that
because
line.
I love to dive into the epistemology of it, of how you know that you were saved at that point, or you were a real Christian at that point, because, well, you seem to say that there are indicators that at that moment my life sort of changed, the sort of actions, like an effect that impacted me to lead this sort of life that changed from a downfall to another, from an upwards progression of quality of life, right? So in defense of that, would you say that there was some different kind of knowledge that allowed you to know that you were a Christian at that point? It's not something like experiential, posterior, or empirical, but maybe something of like a soul, like not a spiritual knowledge of your salvation. Would you say that at that point there was something like that?
I don't know, man. That's a good question, because as I said, for a while, at least initially, I wasn't really sure what was going on. For me, a lot of people, when they talk about their salvation, or when they found Jesus, or he found them, it's a lot of people. It's a moment, right? They could even point to the day when they made the decision. And I've never felt that way. I've always felt that it was sort of this realization slowly after the fact that, hey, wait a minute, I think I am a Christian, and I'm just now realizing it, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, or if you're more.
I fully respect that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe you're
that sort
asking
of that sort of understanding of it, though, that there was not one point of your life that you were saved. It goes with some like more of a Catholic or Orthodox view on it, like where your decision to follow Christ is like a movement towards Him rather than just being like an overturn, like a 100 immediate
right.
flip.
Yep.
Yeah.
For me, it's been for me, it's been a definite progression. But then, as I said, I learned after the fact about this thing called sanctification, right? Like you should experience the lessening of the effects and the control of sin in your life, right? You should experience a growing distaste for sin, like your own personal, not other people's, right? This is all about your own personal inward change, and you should be experiencing that. I had never even heard of anything like that before. So it's almost like I was experiencing this, and then I was learning, oh, okay, that's what that is. And it's continued to this day, right? I mean, it still continues. Yeah. And there are days when you wake up and you feel like, spiritually tired, right? Like, it'd be easy to just give up. It'd be easy to quit. So I think for me, like following Jesus is a daily decision, You wake up each day and you make conscious choices. I'm going to spend time in prayer. I'm going to spend time reading the Bible. You have to make some spiritual disciplines an active, daily, intentional part of your life, or I think you're gonna stagnate in your spiritual development. For a long time, though, I felt like I was just carried along, right? Like it just was happening to me, and I wasn't even doing anything to cause it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm satisfied with that. I guess that we're all in this sanctification path, and I hope you continue to grow, brother. But I would like to ask then, though. I guess that you could say that there was at one point that you did start to change, though. But I want to know about your perspective on the metaphysical nature of of reality. For example, if you were not Christian before, right? Yeah. So how would I would say that you were living as an agnostic or atheist before you decided to fully pursue the Christian path.
Yeah, no, I've always, I would say I've always been a theist. I've never been an atheist. I told my grandmother I was an atheist once when I was like 18 years old because I think I wanted to upset her at the time for some reason. But I was never serious. So I can recall very clearly when I was super young, I want to say maybe 7 years old or something like that, one night, laying in bed, thinking about what caused, like a tree, for example, and the tree grew out of the ground from the seed, and the seed, grew because of the water and the soil and the nutrients, and well, what caused that, and what caused that, and what caused that, and I'd always in my mind work back to, well, if you follow this chain of causes back, well, there must be a God. And like, that's a very rudimentary cosmological argument, but I was making that in my head at the time as a little kid. It was just intuitive, right? Like if you think about any series of causes, to me at the time, it seemed obvious that you're going to have to terminate in a first cause. And so I've always been a theist. It's always just seemed plainly evident to me that God exists. And that's not to say that I never have my doubts or I never have days where I wonder, right? I always want to keep myself open to the possibility. So I'm never, I'm never someone who would say like I'm 100% absolutely certain all the time and I never doubt God's existence. But it's always been pretty evident to me. And the times I have, and even calling it doubt is probably too much. More like wondering, gee whiz, I guess it could be possible that I'm mistaken. But I've never really found any reason to think that that's the case. And I like to look at the atheist arguments. I like to watch the discussions with the atheists on YouTube Capturing Christianity is one of my favorite YouTube channels, and I'm a monthly financial supporter of that channel. And if anybody hasn't heard of it, I strongly recommend you to go check it out. But he hosts discussions all the time with theists and atheists, and I like to hear their arguments, again, because I think we all value believing true things. I've just never ever heard an atheist argument that I found convincing. To me, they all have presuppositions that seem highly questionable to me. So,
Well, I would love to have you someday maybe have a debate with an atheist here on my show. But I would love to focus more on your worldview rather than counter arguments to your worldview. But so, in terms of your worldview, though, right? So you say you're a classical theist. So how does this world work, right? So we have a God, that personal, loving God, creator, and were we created in literal 7 days? What do you think?
So you're still breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it might help to turn our video off to improve it, but we can keep going and see. I think
I'll just send that video.
Let's try with. Yeah, let's try it without video. I think that's better. I'll leave mine on. If we still have problems, I'll shut mine off. Anyway, no, I don't believe that the Earth was created in 6 literal days. I think I don't have a problem with fellow believers who think that way, and I don't think that that kind of thing should be a stumbling block. And I know there are a lot of people out there who they might consider Christianity more seriously, but they've got the mistaken idea that if you're going to believe that the Bible is true, that you have to believe that a literal reading of Genesis is required, and I don't think that. And if I did believe that were required in order to be a Christian, I don't know. It would be really tough for me to bite the bullet on that one, because I just don't think that makes sense.
Okay, though this thing though is I would like to see what you think about why there is a difference between your belief in let's say evolution and billions of years of creation, and Christians who interpret the Bible as literal, in like 6 literal days and then 7th day he rested. Why do you think there's a difference there?
So are you asking me why do I think different Christians come to different conclusions?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with your own tradition, right? I think some people are raised, either in a church or in a family where that view is central to their faith, and it's talked about a lot. And it's I think a lot of people are raised with that view that, look, if you're if you're going to be a Christian, if you're going to say that this is God's word, you need to read it like this, and if you don't, then you are either a heretic or an apostate or whatever. And I think a lot of people just feel a lot of pressure to see the text that way. So yeah, and I think on the flip side, someone like myself, I think that God gave us the ability to do science and the ability to reason and the ability to think. I think that in light of what we know now, given science, concluding that the Earth is not young, I think it is fine. And then, if you take that view, well, how does that comport with Scripture? Is there a way to understand the Genesis account in a way that is both faithful to the text and accords with modern science? And I think absolutely there is. There's a book I read called Genesis Unbound by John Sailhammer, which I would recommend. That is one way of looking at Genesis and understanding it in light of science. And there are other ways too.
But here's a question, though. But here's a question, though, right? Like, if
I was going to plug another really good book, but I'll
Yeah.
wait.
Okay. But if the Bible or if Genesis actually, it literally means 6 days, and it does not imply like billions of years, but it literally means God created the world or the universe in 6 days, and it was proven by science that we have been here for billions of years. Would you would that count as a discredit to discredit the Bible itself and your Christianity?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question. I don't know how we could ever come to know that that the authors or author of Genesis intended for us here in the 21st century, or their original audience that would have heard this account originally. I don't know if there's any way for us to know with absolute certainty what the intent of the author was. I think there are plenty of examples in Scripture where, particularly in the Old Testament, where there's allegory, right? Where it seems to me pretty obvious that the story itself is not meant to be taken literally, and then there are other times when, like in Chronicles and Kings, where most of that is meant to be literal, factual history. So that's the first thing we'd have to know is, okay, 100% for sure, we've now found out that, the authors of Genesis intended for all of us to read this as 6 literal 24-hour days. And I think that will be hard to do. The other thing I would say is that there is also another way to view the text, which is to say that it is 6 literal 24-hour periods, but that it's not about the creation of the entire universe, but rather the Genesis account is about God bringing form and order out of chaos and sort of preparing, and when I say chaos, like the earth, right? So this 6 literal days of creation is God preparing the promised land for his chosen people. And that's another way I think that you can read it. I'm not sure who it is that defends that position. It might be in the book I mentioned. I'm not sure. I've read a few different things about this. So I think that's another way to harmonize it and say, yep, it is 6 24-hour periods, but it doesn't apply to the Big Bang, right? I don't think that when Genesis says "Let there be light," I don't think that's talking about the Big Bang. I think that's
but what I'm
it's an
hearing from
interesting
you, though,
coincidence.
but what I'm hearing from you though is that you have like a fluidity in what you believe, that it could be 6 days, but with this explanation, and it could be billions of years with this explanation. You don't seem to hold a consistent one at that, and that you would take a stand on and actually prove to other Christians that they mistook the Bible as this. You're more of like, okay, you might be right actually, or maybe you could reconsider reading the Bible again and re-understanding it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm always open to changing my position. There are some really, I mean, this is the thing, there are some really intelligent, creationists who are Christians. There's a guy, I think, Todd Wood or something. I think he's a PhD in biology or something like that. He's a creationist, a young Earth creationist, and a really smart, educated guy. And what do I do with that knowledge, right? There's this guy out here who clearly knows more than I do about the relevant fields, and he's got a radically different view than I do. So I mean, I guess I'm open-minded. I tend to think that science is fairly well settled that the Earth is very old, and so we need to understand Scripture in light of science. I think that anybody who wants to just say, well, it doesn't matter what science says, we have to believe what we think the Bible says, I don't know. I think that's a very limited way to look at things. And again, I don't. All truth is God's truth. I think that He gave us the ability to do science and to reason and to think. And so, if our science is telling us that the Earth is old, then to me that's just an invitation to go back and look at the text and try and understand it in the light of what we know now.
Okay, but the thing though, when you say that, is that we have to believe what science tell us because well, God gave us our intelligence to determine knowledge through science, right? But and then what happens though is when science starts to step over what you previously believed in what the Bible said, and you start and you keep moving the goalposts until there's nothing left of what you believed before because science keeps pushing it to a limit, you know? How what would that tell about your beliefs in the Bible and your understanding of it if science if you constantly uh, change it due to scientific discoveries?
Well, I mean, I guess I'd have to, that is more of like a what if kind of a question, right? So, I mean, I think it's a really good question because I think I do need to have a way of because clearly, if I were to simply say that, well, science reigns supreme no matter what, and then it did come to pass that there was some scientific discovery that somehow refuted or invalidated some core tenet of Christianity. I mean, that would definitely be a problem, and that would require some real reflection. I can't imagine what that would be. For me too, as a Christian, I think that an individual's, if you look at in the New Testament, if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Christ is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved, right? It doesn't say if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, et cetera, and you also have these other doctrinally correct beliefs in a young earth and this and that and all this other stuff, and then you'll be saved, right? It doesn't say any of that. So to me, those are all really interesting questions about Genesis and and there are lots of questions about the Old Testament and about the historical reliability of a variety of the different accounts of the Israelites throughout the Old Testament. And so, if your Christian faith hangs on a particular reading of the text, and it doesn't rest solely on Jesus and his person and his work and his resurrection, then to me that's a problem in and of itself. So I do try to remain pretty flexible. So I guess to your question, it would have to be some sort of science that showed that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, right? But that gets right back to what St. Paul says, that if Christ is not raised, then our faith is in vain and we're still dead in our sins. So that's what I would say. Science would have to show that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, and I don't think that science has or could show that. I mean, I think that you would have to somehow they'd have to find his body, and then there'd have to be DNA testing, and who knows how that would if that's even possible, right?
Well, I think though that whatever in your case, whatever science says, you'll still be a Christian nonetheless. I think that's what you've been saying, since you started being a Christian without the rationalist parts before, right?
True. However, as I said, at the end of the day, Christianity as a whole, the entire thing, regardless of which, brand of Christianity you prefer, all of it, all of us ultimately are Christians because Jesus rose from the dead. That's the linchpin of everything. And so if there were some sort of science that showed that didn't occur, that's a problem, right? And that's where a lot of atheists focus their firepower, right? They focus their efforts to try and refute or discredit Christianity by focusing on the resurrection.
Well, I don't think that they can say anything about the resurrection, but some attempt to. But anyways, what about your views on the Bible, right? Like, how would you say that any those who contest the reliability of the Bible?
Well, I mean, I guess I'd have to know more about what specifically are they contesting.
Okay, let's say about
'Cause I think I
the
saw-
witnesses not being that the testimonies themselves, being not unreliable because they're not even first-hand witnesses.
Sure. Yeah, and this is going to get sort of out of my area of well, I wouldn't even call it expertise, but
Okay, but if it's not
primary
in your
area of
expertise, though, then but why do you believe in the Bible in the first place? Would you say that okay, there might be experts in that defend the reliability of the Bible? I'll just have faith in what they have to
Right.
say. Is that what you're saying?
You know what? I think sometimes. So there's a couple things going on here, right? Like the truth of the Bible is a very broad category. I think when someone says a question like, "Is the Bible true?" I'm not even sure what that question means necessarily, right? Like that needs to be unpacked so that we can understand what it is we're talking about, right? Is it literally true in every single solitary thing that it says? Did Jonah really spend 3 days inside of a giant fish? 3 days and 3 nights inside of a giant fish? Or are we saying is the Bible true in all that it teaches in order to save human beings, to give human beings a knowledge of who God is and His plan for humanity through Christ, right? So there's two things, and I think that you can take I think you have to have a very strong view about who Jesus was and about his, the fact that he was a real person and that he died and rose again. And then I think that all of these, secondary and tertiary issues are interesting. They're good to think about. But I don't think like I said, I don't think they're central to the Christian faith.
In a way, you don't believe in the miracles like stated like in the Old Testament, like that.
I mean, that depends. But
it's an easy answer though. Like, did the miracles occur or did they not? What do you think? It's a simple question.
I think yep, it is absolutely, and I would say most of them did. The only ones that I really take issue with.
Which ones?
Well, I mean, I would say like the Book of Jonah, which is an incredible book. I do not believe the author or authors of Jonah wrote that with the intention of communicating historical facts, right? I mean, if you
why?
If you
Why
read
do
the
you
book,
think though?
Well, I mean, so I think because I will appeal to authority because I know biblical scholars who are solid Christians who hold that view, and I think that I trust them. I trust their expertise. But if you read the book, there's a lot of hyperbole. There's a lot of exaggeration. There's a lot of humor in the book. If anybody's interested, I will plug a brief series of sermons by a guy named Tim Mackey. He runs the Bible Project. And he did I believe it was a 3-part series on the Book of Jonah on his podcast, Exploring My Strange Bible, which is he's no longer updating it, but the feed is still out there and you can get the episodes. Go and listen to his 3-part thing on Jonah. It's amazing. It's awesome. The Book of Jonah is theologically true, right? I mean, it tells the reader things that are true, but does it intend to tell you or to tell the original audience that was listening to the story that there was a guy who actually got swallowed up by a whale and spent
But
time
I want to
inside
know
of it?
this though. Like, this is interesting to me because you believe in other miracles, but why not just believe in a miracle of a guy being swallowed up by a whale for 3 days? The miracle.
Yeah, well,
the miracle of like the Moses dividing the flood is a lot. The Red Sea is a lot more unbelievable than a whale swallowing up a human. Right.
Well, yes, it is absolutely. And so what I would say is I don't believe or disbelieve based on how incredible it is. For me, it's a matter of what did the author intend, right? So if I were to be convinced that the author of Jonah intended for that to be heard by his original audience and understood by us as factual history, then I would believe that yes. Because again, if and I'll play, I call playing the God card, right? If God exists, miracles are possible. End of story. So yes, if God exists, a guy could, sure, get swallowed by a whale and be, spend 3 days in it. I mean, I think it sounds a bit absurd to me, but again, if I thought that the author, if that was the intent of the book, was to communicate that. But I think when we read that book in particular, and if anybody goes and listens to that sermon I mentioned, the 3-part sermon by Tim Mackey, I think when we listen, or read the story of Jonah and we all get hung up on the miracle, or this crazy thing that happened, we miss completely all of the other theological truths that are in the story. And so I think there's just a lot more going on there. And when we get all hung up on, well, did this really happen or did it not? I think we're just missing out on what that book in particular has to offer. So it depends, right? With regard to the Exodus, I've always assumed that was a real historical event. I mean, it seems kind of required if God is going to lead the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt. Seems important that be a real historical event, right? And I think that when you read that account, I think that the authors in Exodus are absolutely trying to communicate, this is what really happened.
Well, I think that this drives us back to the question, though. What made you believe in the Bible in the first place? Was it simply by faith? Or did you actually have like a rational study of the reliability and validity of the Bible and its claims, like for example about Moses and what happened there and the miracles there?
Right. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think it's important to take things on a case-by-case basis. I think it's important to look at scholarship to see what people who study these things and know a lot more than I do think. So again, I don't know. I guess I'm comfortable saying I don't know with some stuff.
Okay, so in a way, you're just gonna take the word of the scholars. That's it. That's it, right?
Well, I think that we all have to do that ultimately, right? I mean, unless you've taken the time to, learn Hebrew and become very familiar with ancient Near Eastern cultures and really dig deep into the history and the people and the text, at a certain point you have to defer to experts, right? And for somebody to say, well, my pastor says that all of this stuff really happened, and so I'm just going to believe it. Well, that's okay. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong or that you shouldn't listen to your pastor. But for me personally, I'd like to talk to or read someone who is has spent more time focusing on those particular questions, right? Okay. And then I guess for me, it also depends on whether or not I think those questions, for me personally, are interesting or germane to my own walk of faith. And I guess I've never really been too hung up on that stuff. In my work, work's probably the wrong word, but in my time spent reading, doing apologetics, and learning, I've always found learning about the New Testament, learning about the Gospels and the disciples a lot more interesting and a lot more relevant, right, to the question of the truth of Christianity.
Okay, so but what does this say about what you believe, though, right? Because you formed your belief system around Christianity, and you've been a Christian probably since you were a child, but you've got a certain revival in the late stages of your life. But what does it say that is Christianity simply a faith? that there are parts that you have to just say I don't know, and you have to just have faith in some parts of it.
Well, sure. Yeah, I think absolutely. I want to correct one thing though. You said that I've been a Christian most of my life and had a revival. I would definitely not characterize myself that way. I grew up, getting taken to church, but I always sort of just figured religion's a way for the adults to try and tell us what to do and keep us in line. So I never really took it seriously.
Okay.
I recall I can't count how many Sundays sitting in Sunday school, counting the pages in the hymnal and totally ignoring the sermon. Who knows? Maybe if I'd paid more attention, I would have figured things out a lot sooner. But anyway, I just wanted to make that clear. And then what was the? Oh yeah, faith. Yes, I think ultimately at the end of the day, there are certain things that we have to take on faith, and so like. St. Thomas, for example, he would say, using reason alone and observing the natural order, we can come to a knowledge of God, for example. But he didn't believe that you could, that you could use reason to come to a conclusion that the Trinity is true, right? That's a revealed truth, and that is faith to me, right? That is. Trusting that revelation in Scripture is true and is correct. Mm-hmm. So there are things that you definitely have to take on faith.
Okay.
And I think that's okay. I honestly wouldn't want, to me, if you had absolute epistemic certainty, you no longer need faith, right? And so I think that having faith is good and important because in that faith you're trusting, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess then though you have to take account of what kind of faith you have, right? And whether or not your faith is something that is a good one. You could have a lot of bad faiths, like what happens with cults and a lot certain denominations of Christianity that went really bad, But how do you decipher whether or not your faith is something that is not dangerous or wrong?
Well, yeah, I guess I've never felt like I had to decipher that. I've never felt like God was calling me to do something, dangerous or immoral. Since I've become a Christian, as I talked about, it's been for me a wonderful and beautiful experience. With times of trial and challenge, as you continue to walk in faith. But so for me, the evidence is just beyond just the apologetics and all of that stuff. The evidence for me is clear in the change I've seen in myself when I haven't even tried to change. It was for me as if I were changed from the outside or from the inside, I guess, right? But it wasn't me doing it. And so that to me is evidence that whatever I've experienced is good.
Mm-hmm. Well, if an atheist were to understand what you just said, that you would accept that there are things that you have to take as in faith, in Christianity, well, they would ultimately say that you're probably wrong if you're just going to take it on faith because you just don't know empirically and you can't prove it. So in a way, you're building your house on sand. How would you?
Well, what I would push back on that and just say that ultimately all of us have faith, right? I have faith that other minds exist, right? I can't see other minds. I can't cut open someone's head and look at their mind. But I have a belief that solipsism is not true, that I'm not the only mind that exists. So, to me, that's a kind of faith. You might have reasons for believing it based on, the analogy of the comparative behavior of other people with yourself and infer that they must have a mind. The reality of the past, right? I think we all take it as a given that the world wasn't created 5 seconds ago, but there's no way to know that, right? By definition, any evidence given would have been created 5 seconds ago. So that's another one of those things that, well, we just don't know, And if you wanted to be more skeptical, you can say that we all have faith that our senses are providing us with true information about the world. We have faith that we're not a brain in a vat. Those sorts of things. So ultimately, all of our knowledge rests on unprovable propositions, basic beliefs, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, though, you're sort of qualifying all sorts of faith, right? Like, I have faith that I'm God. We're all just basing our faiths on unprovable but that's not what normal people do. Normal people rely on science, and how you would rely on science as well in your daily life. But there are things that would seem unconvincing, as for example, as would Christianity would appear unconvincing to a lot of atheists. What would you say about that?
Well, I mean, if I'm talking to any given atheist, I want to kind of step back and say, before we get into talking about the truth of Christianity, we should probably first establish, that God exists. If an atheist doesn't think God exists, well, then, Christianity is not true, and no other religion is true, nor could it be true. So that would be the first place I would go. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time debating the truth of Christianity with someone that doesn't even think God exists. That's where I would begin.
Well, Barry, I just want to ask you one last question. Because you are a Christian right now, what direction would you say you're heading towards? Like, what kind of Christian man, and what are your goals right now in terms of you developing yourself towards a better life, like Christ?
I mean, my goals are practicing spiritual discipline. I read a book recently by Dallas Willard called The Spirit of the Disciplines, and he makes a really good case in there that a lot of Christians have the mistaken notion that sanctification is something that just sort of happens, right? You become a Christian, and then over time God's just going to do stuff to you through the power of the Holy Spirit or whatever to make you better or less sinful or whatever. I think that's true to a point, but ultimately I think that each of us has to do some work. And so, he lays out in there a number of spiritual disciplines that people can practice if they're serious about growing in their spiritual lives. So practicing those, those are things like fasting, for example, prayer is an obvious one, reading scripture, solitude, or silence, where you actually don't speak for a period of time. And there are others, poverty, for a period of time, something like that, choosing to spend less money or to give more money away. So those are some of the things I'd like to do. I mean, as a daily practice, I get up every day, and most days the first thing I do is read the Bible. I like the YouVersion Bible app. If anybody has not used that, I highly recommend it. There's a daily story too. It's sort of like it looks and feels kind of like an Instagram story, but it's a Bible verse and some meditations on the verse, and then a very brief presentation from a different pastor or speaker or whatever on the day's topic. So I'll do that. I'll read the Bible, pray, or sometimes I'll save my prayer time for the evening. And those are the things that I think are essential. I think if you're not reading the Bible on a regular basis and you're not praying on a regular basis, I think that's a very dangerous place to be spiritually. So, for me personally, it's funny because I like the fact that, you're 20 years old and you've got this podcast that you started doing. I think that's awesome, man. I hope you,
Thanks, man.
You keep doing it, because I've wanted to do something like that, but it's intimidating to get on calls with people you don't know at all and talk about these kinds of things.
It is.
Or
yeah.
potentially, have a debate with someone that disagrees with you. So I'd definitely like to get more involved in that kind of stuff. I have, just a ton of respect for guys like Cameron Bertuzzi on Capturing Christianity, where he was a photographer, and his brother, announced that he was an atheist, and so he started researching Christianity and all this stuff, and started the YouTube channel. And now it's just grown like crazy. I think he's pushing like 70,000 subscribers on YouTube. So, it just shows that you don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to be a scholar in order to jump in and start, making content and interacting with people and defending the faith and showing people who aren't believers, that they are loved and that they're going to be respected and treated well when they talk to Christians. I think that's something that there's way too much of. There's way too many Christians who are jerks to atheists, who are jerks to unbelievers. And on behalf of every other Christian out there, I apologize if you've ever come across a Christian who is rude or mean to you online, because that's not Christ-like. And I think we're all called to imitate Christ in the way we treat others, especially people who are outside the faith, because we want them to know that they're loved and to feel welcomed into the family of faith.
Awesome, man! And I just want to say thank you so much for being on my podcast. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. Well,
yeah, it was fun.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
We're moving in a new direction, moving forward, and moving beyond smoking. We are Altria, and our companies are leading the way in moving adult smokers away from cigarettes by taking action to transition millions toward potentially less harmful choices as we move from being known as a tobacco company to being recognized as a tobacco harm reduction company. Altria is moving beyond smoking. Find out how at altria.com.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.